Hello everyone, Carlos here from the Trusted Sec Research Team. So on this video, we're going to be going over the Sysmon configuration file. The Sysmon configuration file is actually in XML. I know XML, it can be painful and we need to numb the pain a bit when we're working with it. I'm going to do my best to explain it in a way that is easy for you to understand, is concise. So let's take a look right now at the structure of a Sysmon configuration file. Let's go over the general structure of the configuration file. One of the things that we're going to notice is that our root element is going to be named Sysmon, and we're going to have an attribute which is going to be the schema version. Schema version is actually tied to the version of the executable. So if we go and open a PowerShell window here, and I run sysmon -s to print the schema, we're going to see the schema version for this specific binary version. So schema version here is 4.83. If we look at a previous version of the schema, for example, if I look at version 4.81, we're going to see that this is for the binary version 16 of the major versions of Sysmon. One of the things that this allows us is that as vulnerabilities, bugs are found on older versions of Sysmon, we don't need to upgrade our configuration to that version. Sysmon already has a collection of every previous configuration and is able to understand what event type and what operators are available with that version of Sysmon. Under this root element, we're going to find the hash algorithm. This is going to be either SHA-1, SHA-256, which is default import hash, or we can just put an asterisk for all. We can specify more than one algorithm type if we want. Under this, we have check revocation, which is another element that we can add. This element is going to be checking for the signature if the signing certificate has been revoked or not. We have archive directory. The default is Sysmon. This is where Sysmon can archive any file that gets generated or any file that we want to save because it's being deleted or shredded. We have field sizes. This is specifically for Sysmon for Linux. This allows us to control the size of the different fields. This goes in par with the syslog configuration that we have set up on our Linux host, since we have a limit in the size of the string for each syslog entry. Under this, we also have DNS lookup, which is for the network connection events, where if we want Sysmon to perform a DNS lookup to the host for the connection or not, this is a performance parameter. So as we can see, we have this ones here. If we look at the schema, we're going to notice that we have even more different ones that we can use. The problem with some of them is that they have been deprecated. Even though they're mentioned in the schema, they're no longer valid, as we saw in our configuration video. Now, under this, we're going to have event filtering. This is where we actually perform the filtering actions of what data do we want to capture and what data we want to exclude. Under this element, back in the day, before version 4.22, we would just specify an event type, process create, process access, whichever event type we wanted. If it was an include or an exclude on matches, and then what is going to happen is that we would put our filters under this. So we put each one of our different filters for each field of the event that is associated to that event type with our operator and our value to match on that filter. Before version 4.22, everything was an OR. So OR and an OR for this one. What happens nowadays is that all of this is an AND, which means that it's not that useful for us whatsoever because we want to have multiple rules to match on. So the way that we now change this after version 4.22 of the schema is that we have what we call rule groups. The advantage of the rule groups is that we can control the group relation. So we can specify if it is going to be an AND or an OR. The way that we're going to manage this is that under this, we're going to include our event type. My recommendation is to have one rule group per event type. So we have one rule group for process creation, where we're going to put our inclusion and our exclusion, if we have both of them, under that same rule group. And under that one, under the event type, we can have our different fields, or we can have compound rules. The advantage of compound rules is that we also have control over the logic, either of an and or an or. We typically use and if we want to have a complex rule set where we have matching on multiple fields. And if we match on multiple fields, we're going to either include or exclude that specific action, or we can just specify, or if we just want to group multiple filters under a single group, which we can just set a name for that one. And yeah, it makes life much simpler to group different actions. It saves me time of putting a name on each one of the different fields, and also makes it more readable. So we have both of those ways that we can actually work across this. In another video, I'm going to talk about how do you mix different fields with compound rules, because it changes the way that the order gets processed. It's a bit more complex, but we have another video for that one. Now, if we look, for example, here, and we're looking at SwiftOnSecurity configuration, we see that she specifies actually multiple different hashes. So she has MD5, SHA-256, import hash. She also has enabled check revocation. And then under event filters, we're going to see what I told you, which is to have a rule group. And under that rule group, we have specific type. Now, if we look over here and I collapse this rule group, here we can see that she has another rule group for event ID2. So she has an event rule group for each one of the different types across her recommended configuration. One of the things that I really like about her configuration is all of the information that she has included with comments. When you're working with your own configuration, it's highly, highly recommended for you to comment that file to make it more readable for anybody that's using this. And in fact, one of the things that I also recommend is to have a header block over here, like she has, where she has different notes, different references. And also, my recommendation to you is to keep a change log inside of there. You're going to find out as you're working in a more complex environment that you're going to be creating different Sysmon configuration rules for different groups of computers inside of your environment to address the unique behaviors and applications that each one of those users in those groups are going to have. If we look at Sysmon modular, we're going to see that in this case, Olaf has chosen a different path. In his case, hash algorithm, he's including all of them. He's checking, he has disabled check revocation for performance reasons. Same thing for DNS lookup. The archive directory is going with the default there. We'll get into more detail. And when we look at his configuration, he's mapping each one of the different images to specific MITRE attack framework techniques and also tactics, which is very useful. Some of this stuff can be consolidated, as he has done over here, in more complex rules. So he has a mixture of both of them. Now, as I mentioned in another video, we're going to go about rule order and what we need to be careful when we're working with this type of configuration where we're mixing compound rules with individual filters. So as we can see, we have two different types. We have Swift, which is a rule group event type, and just filters under that with no compound rules. And then we have Olaf, which has decided to go with a mix of compound rules with event filters. So as you can see, we can make our configuration files as complex as we want, but in terms of its structure, it is very simple. We follow the nomenclature of having a rule group specifying or, and then keeping a rule group per event type inside of that one, and then deciding on the logic that we're going to be using for our different rules is how we're going to determine how are we going to put either individual filters, compound rules, or a mixture of both. Okay, so we just went through the structure of the Sysmon configuration file, and now we need to understand specifically when we're working with each one of the different event types, what are the different fields that we have? And when we look at the schema, we need to understand what the schema is actually showing us when it comes to each one of those events and event types. Now let's take a look at how the schema actually shows the information about event types. So here we have the event type for system event create process. So this is the event that gets generated when a process gets started. So when we look here at the information and we look at the value, we see a number 1 value actually represents the event ID. We can see that the level is informational. Now, when we look at rule name specifically, it says process create. That is the value that we're going to be using to reference that event type. We see that rule defaults is include. And one important thing to notice is that we see version number 5. When we see in version higher numbers than 1, this actually means that throughout the life of Sysmon, it has been updated, new fields have been added, and information has been changed around this event. This is very important if you are a blue teamer and you actually are consuming all of these events in a sim, to notice when a new version of Sysmon comes out, what is the version number for that given event. So you're able to address that with your rules and leverage the new information that is now available to you. Now, when we take a look at the information in terms of the fields for the event, there are 2 specific parameters that we need to look at in detail. One of them is going to be the name, that it's the name of the field that we're going to be filtering for, and also the out type. The out type is going to be the type of value that we're going to be working with, and this will actually determine what is the type of operator that we're going to be using when we're writing our filters and writing our rules. Okay, so now we know how to read the schema for when we're looking at the different fields and what is going to be their output. Now let's take a look at the operators that we have available to us when we're writing our configuration file. So let's take a look at the operators that Sysmon makes available to us. We're going to start with is. Is going to be the equivalent of equals. So here we're going to have image condition is C Windows System 32 ipconfig.exe. So it's going to match that entire unique string. In this case, this would be for ipconfig.exe. Now, if I ran ipconfig.exe, let's say from the desktop, it's going to not match, and it's not going to be either included or excluded depending on how I set up my event type. Is any is used when we have multiple values and we want to specify those exact matches inside of an array. The delimiter for the array is going to be the colon. So here I'm going to have granted access condition is any. So if any of those values is an exact match for that string, then it's going to be either included or excluded. In the case of is not, we have the negation of the equals. In this case, I have a compound rule as an example where destination port is going to be 88. And then the condition is not is going to be Windows System 32 else has.exe. So any other process that tries to talk a browse, I'm going to match in the case of this compound rule. Now, when we take a look at the other operator, we have contains. Contains is going to be kind of like our wildcard. So this will match anywhere in a string the specified value that we provide. So I can go command line condition contains HTTP. So any executable that has the either in the command line or as part of the image itself, because command line contains the full image, the character set of HTTP, it is going to match. So if I have any bin or any malicious file that I drop on disk and it's trying to open a URL via the command line, this will match that specific case. Now we have contains any. Again, this all of the any's are going to be for an array. So in this case, I could go target file condition contains any, and I have multiple extensions there. This will allow me to cover multiple execution type files for Windows that I want to trigger for this specific filter. I have contains all, which means that all of the values that I provide in the array have to match. And this condition would be users and app data. So this is very useful specifically for user folders or user registry keys, because we don't know ahead of time what is going to be, in the case of the registry, the set of the user. In the case of a file or folder, we don't know what is going to be that specific username, and we don't want to put them all inside of there. So this becomes very useful for us. Then we have excludes, which is going to be, hey, I want to exclude, and this behaves kind of like a wildcard. In the case of command line, Windows System32 svchost.exe/k. Also, I can do excludes any, and I can just specify, hey, anything that is Dropbox.exe, winlockbeat.exe, packetbeat.exe, OneDrive.exe. Hey, I want to exclude those. In this case, for the image condition that we have here as an example, I can have this where, let's say, destination port is 80 and destination port is 443. And I want to just not log those, and I want to exclude them from being logged as part of my specific rule set that I have for my configuration. And then we have excludes all, which is I want to make sure that if all of the values are present in that string, I want to exclude this specific type of event. So in this case would be C users and then app data local Microsoft OneDrive for an image load. This means that anything that gets loaded from that location, I want to exclude it. I don't want to log it. Then we have begin with. Here we have a very good example where I'm just looking for all of the different writable folders than a user may have. And I'm making sure that I'm checking if somebody probably dropped a file on any of those and they're executing that executable from that location. The list is a lot longer, but this just is to show you a possible use case that you can have for it. Then we have not begin with. So this is useful if I'm looking for executables that were not executed from C Windows System 32. And this will allow me to consolidate probably a bunch of rules when I'm normalizing behavior in a system based on the execution, either via parent and child in a rule set. Then I have ends with. So let's say I have a bunch of redistributable packages that are being applied, and I want to go like, hey, image condition ends with redis.exe. I want to ignore those, so I'm going to put this in my exclude. So I'm not logging a bunch of data that every time that we have a patch Tuesday or we have an update cycle that is going to fill up my logs in my sim and cost me money. Also, I have not end with, so it's the negation of end with. So in this case, is like, hey, if it is not app data local Microsoft Teams current teams.exe, ignore this. I can have this as part of a compound rule in case somebody's just naming teams.exe their payload. Another one that I have is image. In the case of image, what it's going to do is going to look at the string, and the last part of the string after the slash is going to be matched to this specific operator. So it will work with rundle32.exe. It will work for any of the executables that we run in the case of image. Now, if we use this operator, let's say for the command line, it is going to be specifically for everything that goes after that slash, that last slash of is what is being used as a delimiter in the case of the logic of this operator. So as you can see, with a Sysmon configuration file, we have quite a large amount of flexibility in what we can do to actually find and hunt for specific behavior in our systems that we can feed into our sim, and then we can have our own rules in our SIM to generate alert for us, and we can work with those. So I really do hope that you liked the video. I hope that you found the information useful. And as always, remember to like and subscribe. And thank you.